Um, I mentioned that phrase that he used. I think that's one reason he was so popular is "follow your bliss" and other phrases like that. How do you understand his central message? What he was, because he did seem to have a core message that he kept coming back to.
Yes.
How would
Yes.
you, if somebody asked you what, in 25 words or less, what was Campbell's central message?
Oh, well, I think the title, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, was the dearest message for him. I think it was how it all comes back to the individual journey and the role of symbols in life interpretation play in an individual journey. And in that sense, it's Jungian. I think he more and more saw that in connection to Jung, uh, and yet Jung was more restricted to his audiences and the vocabularies that went with them, and Campbell was able to be expansive about it and American about it, about the individual quest, and he seemed to give by universalizing the individual quest, without the Jungian or Freudian vocabulary, or without relying on it anyway, but looking at it in terms of universal stages and symbols of a life's journey, um, things that we need to encounter and incorporate. He was able to, I think, get the best of Jung into his work while making it more available than would otherwise be the case with Jung's more specific vocabulary, about individuation, more technical vocabulary. So I would say, in more than 25 words, that the Hero of the Thousand Faces is every ego undertaking a journey with obstacles in it, and with goals, and with sometimes notions of returning the benefits of what one has learned on one's journey
Exactly.
to society, which he surely did, and that's why his own life is a pretty good model of what he's talking about. Look at the boon that he brought back to civilization, so to speak, after his searching around in Europe and realizing that the Western story is not the only story. And I guess if there were a second theme besides the individual journey, I guess it would be that, is the transcultural, cross-cultural bringing in of Asian and non-Western materials into getting us deprovincialized about otherwise being deprovincializing us from our narrowly Western biblical perspectives that, well, that's religion,
Yeah.
and getting us out of that, prying us out of that, and kicking and screaming sometimes.
He was actually pretty hard on the Western biblical tradition,
Yeah.
And he claimed in an interview that I did with him that we've got the wrong mythology. That he felt that Eastern philosophy and mythology was more attuned to what science is telling us than we're getting out of the Bible.
Yeah.
I remember him saying the Bible, a book written a long time ago, and like that. Do you think he did justice to the our Western tradition, or was he a little too hard on it? Do you think?
A little too hard. A little too hard because, as I think many were, like one thinks of Alan Watts and some of the people of that generation who had discovered the East, and their way of discovering it entailed pushing off from the West, and to some extent stereotyping what they were pushing off from, and labeling it and reducing it to certain generalizations and labels. And so I was perhaps a little guilty of that myself, but people later sort of pounced on him for that. What are you, anti-Semitic or something? Why are you?
I've heard that charge.
Yeah. And,
is that just because he was hard
well,
about
he
the
would
Bible?
make some sweeping generalizations that were not entirely kind to biblical representation of religion, and since a great deal of Bible is the Jewish Bible, I think some people, I think he did not take really a measured approach to that, because he kind of had a gospel he was preaching himself, and he preferred the Asian monistic worldview and mystical worldview to the biblical, which he thought was narrow and nationalistic and too self-centered and
leads to warfare. Yeah.
That moment, it's funny. I mean, that he was experiencing that push off from the West long ago, half a century ago and more, and yet many people today still think religion is the Bible. So there's this kind of disparity between levels of knowledge of religion, still upon us.
You think Campbell would be disappointed if he came back and saw the situation is pretty much the same as when he left this earth? I think he might be. I don't know.
I don't know. He also was something of an artist, and since his love of literature and for him, he wasn't invested in religion really. He was more of a symbolist and a mythologist and a mythographer, which in some ways is another level of framing the human situation than religious commitments and affiliations. And I think he was more at that, and hence his interest in James Joyce.
Yes.
And this which leads to kind of the bigger picture of human archetypes and symbols. So I think he would. I think he would realize that there are these different levels of knowledge, and that they will persist.
Now, you mentioned Alan Watts.